So we're about resilience. Our brand, the Resilience Dynamic, is based on long-standing research and practice in the field with colleagues like Anne and Orla and many others. There are just under 100 in our community of practice that are now beginning to spread across the world. And we know, and you will have come into this thinking possibly about your own definitions about resilience. Often people will think about coping and bounce back. Possibly that toughening up, especially in current situation right now. But actually, we know that resilience is the capacity for change. It's about adaptability. So very, very key for us to think about it much more strategically, to equipping leaders, managers, and the workforce with that, to think across the whole organisation about it. So that's our bag. And Ellie, if you go to the next one, our main framework for all our services is this first research model, the most used across the board by any of our practitioners and our clients, is the Resilience Dynamic. And it shows a framework of different, if you like, a spectrum of resilience levels, of that ability to be able to absorb and successfully adapt, ranging from breakdown, where there is no capacity for change, right the way through to breakthrough, where somebody is at ease no matter the context. And context matters a lot here because your resilience can change quite a lot depending upon the context, whether that's personal and work, or even within work, you know, one meeting to the next, the kind of topic that you're talking about, the demand upon you, the people, and your psychological safety. So you could see this model as a line of our spectrum around psychological safety as well. And how people are and how teams are, how organizations are, will absolutely be defined by this. So we know this underpins performance and well-being, and there are really significantly different behaviours and capability to or resourcefulness, if you like, to unlock what you're doing depending upon the level that you're in here. We also know it goes up and down, so there's lots of things can be done to actually stabilise, and very many practical things to be done to actually boost it. So that's what we're about. Ellie, if we go to the next one, we use a framework which we have found really important, and in our work, especially in organisations, that unless organisations see, and we just go through this, Ellie, if they don't see it, there's no chance of them engaging really to push towards an understanding. So there's the pioneers, of course, will do that, but the middle kind of crew of your organisation, often 40, 50, even 60% of your workforce are sitting relatively inert often. And unless they've got some kind of understanding and can really see themselves and see their life and see and make sense of it, there is not going to be any change. So that unlocker of C opens the doorway to then going in and developing and then optimizing it. And just the last one, and we are delighted to help organisations do just that. We equip organisations in being able to build their own capability. We've created this new dashboard in order for individuals, teams and organisations to see what their resilience is. That demand versus capacity piece is actually really trackable, and then activate it to some extent through online e-learning, but also through coaching. And some of our internal practitioners are doing that loads. So that's what we're about. It is my great pleasure, therefore, to think about actually potentially different start points into that world. And one of them is about culture. To start us off, Ellie, can we go to the next one? I'm just going to take you through a few sort of thought points before we get into the roundtable discussions. So just on this one, Ellie, and don't go to the next one, put in the chat room your start point about what does a healthy culture mean to you? What does a healthy culture mean to you? Both Abby and Phil saying straight off the bat, open and honest and, you know, authentic, listening. You're valued. Fun. Love that, Elaine. Engagement. And trust is such an interesting word right now, isn't it? So Amy Bradley was talking about trust a lot. Supportive, encouraged. No Sunday night worries.
Mm-hmm.
That Verdi. Absolutely fabulous. Space for discussion, openness to new ideas. Yeah, innovation, and it's very interesting the data that gets shown in healthy organizations and innovation and that safety, that feeling of safety, Stuart. So lovely. Yeah, and psychological safety to be able to say it as it is without fear of reprisal. And we see it across all different sectors, that complication of either complicity, where you don't speak up, or apathy, because you're too exhausted, or the power dynamic and the lack of reciprocity between the sort of leaders, if you like, and what the organisation really is versus an employee. So absolutely lovely. Sense of belonging and equity, Kate, lovely. And let's take it into the second question then, just to kind of get the juices flowing. So for organisations that have got this stuff right, what are they doing? How are they balancing up the drive for productivity, performance, versus the people? What have you observed? What are you experiencing about what healthy organisations do right? And it may be vicariously rather than directly in your own situation. I love that, Bernie, taking the time for all that listening and dialogue. Just you're talking about time as well. And that's interesting, Phil, about incentivization. So, we could get into that in the round table. That would be really good. Purpose and inclusion and diversity, we definitely know that that's part of the game. Yeah. Very good. Lovely thoughts to come into the conversation with. I've got a couple of other thoughts for you. So Ellie, let's just go to the next one. Our work, we've been researching resilience since 2007, actually, and more so in teams and the collective resilience much later than that. Probably starting around 2016-17. Anne was involved in some of that research, and we continue to inquire in quite complex systems, whether that's across NHS and social care, for example. We work with Google, you'll see some reference to Google case studies, and with quite complexity in terms of agile and innovation, etc. So but we also lean on other researchers, and Josh Bersin research, which is global, part of Deloitte. Very, very, very good research around healthy organisations. And only 15% of organisations are at that full-blown thing that we were talking about. Okay, of healthy organisations. So really being able to balance up the productivity and performance. And there's a range, isn't there? So, you're going from originally safety through to well-being, which might be sitting on the side at level 2, to then really thinking about performance and people at the same time, through to much more embedding well-being as a cultural norm, and focusing on course correction, etc., throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout, and embodying some of that values around listening and openness, etc. So, only 15% are there, but there is there's hope in the middle of other organisations. Interesting to sort of sense check where you may be working or where your clients are working. Let's go to the next one, Ellie. This is the Josh Bersin framework for healthy organisations. So 6 main factors and 24 actual activity areas, if you like, ranging from physical sort of environment, but actually things like compensation, workload, purpose, well-being specifically, human-centered approach. If anyone has been in education, child-centered sort of learning, human-centered organizations here, diversity and inclusion, and psychological safety. So you can see those things there, and it's really interesting to notice them. Let's go to the next one, Ellie. And here's the so what for healthy organizations. Twice, that more than double the financial targets, and that would include in the public sector, sort of 10 times more likely to have lower rates of absenteeism, almost 3 times more likely to adapt well. So pretty phenomenal, right? So there's a real upside, and there's a bit of a sort of, how do you go along the journey of believing that? Because it can sometimes mean that you're undoing or having to unlearn what you have, what's got you to today. So the process is about what good looks like. We have to be untangled a little bit and actually something else put in place. So let's go to the next one, Eddie. So our questions for you in this round table are, what can we do to implement some of these concepts? What do we need to understand? Who needs to understand that? And what's the stop and start points? So taking some of the kind of things that you've been talking about. And Marie-Claude, bonjour. You are arriving into our round table, Marie-Claude, so that you are most welcome. And we are just going to get into debate about healthy organizations, which I'm sure you can join straight into, knowing where you're coming from and all the work we've done together. So we are going to be working for about 20 minutes in round tables. We're going to set up 3. Anne, Orla and myself will be hosts in each room, and we will come back and see what we make of these questions. So just to repeat, how can we implement those concepts? What do we need to understand? Who needs to be understanding that and engaged in it? And are there any things that we need to stop versus start? Thank you very much, and enjoy the conversation, everyone. Welcome back. Do put your video on. We may have lost a few people. Salut Marie-Claude. So welcome. How was that? How were the discussions? Thinking?
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah, really rich.
Cool. So, maybe we just go around the rooms and hear some of the top thoughts. Anne, since you started.
Okay.
Yeah, lovely. That sounds good.
Yeah, just some real highlights. Anne had to leave us, unfortunately, but not before we'd had some really lovely conversations, and coming at it from really quite different perspectives of being deeply rooted in the research and the understanding to being an apprentice, and looking at how from those different perspectives and different lenses we see a healthy organization. And what came through very clearly was this idea of leaders being at every level, and that actually listening to every level, being non-judgmental, listening to all the voices, vulnerability being at the heart, and learning being at the heart. Marie-Claude came up with a phrase of listening at scale, and particularly listening to the vulnerable, listening to the people whose voices don't get heard, and the idea of inclusivity and diversity being actually at the heart. And Anne was very, very clear about how we use language so that it is inclusive and not exclusive, which I think, so Marie-Claude and Abby, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but I think that was sort of pulled together where we got to.
That's very good. strong, you know, and demanding as well, the listening at scale. You know, I know we've always had many debates about that. Lovely. Orla, what would you say was your group sort of insights?
What came up for our group, where if I was to pick two themes, one was around time and the other one was around simplicity. So we were talking about the amount of research. So now we've got Berson's research and we've got the resilience dynamic research and we've got lots of different research. And actually capturing people's time to do reflection, to feel that they're being listened to have these deeper conversations, and find access points for people, and bring it down to very simple practices. So rather than sort of, you know, rolling out and putting in place, you know, big programs, it would be more to, you know, capture people's time in a more natural way. So at meetings, at get-togethers, to use the time where we have exposure and access to groups of people anyway, to introduce them to very practical tools around how to get in touch with their own resilience, how to understand what are the key enablers, what might be the barriers, and to simplify resilience as being part of what we need to do on a day-to-day basis, but really simplify it down. So it's not, you know, it's, you know, I think part of the expression was that there was lots of information at the start of this call, for instance, of, well, here's more research, you know. So it's actually how to simplify everything down and allow, you know, allow leaders and allow employees to access it in a very simple way, in a very practical way, and you know, support them in seeing actually this stuff works. So whether you're talking about the river, whether you're talking about, you know, we practiced a mindful moment at the start of our session together. So those very simple, practical things, and to weave it into the everyday work of the organization rather than a big, you know, a big program or something that's complex, with lots and lots of research, because people just at the moment don't have the capacity to absorb it and do any. It's just more another area to think about, another thing to do, when it's actually about, well, how do we weave it into their day-to-day lives and make it easier and simpler for them.
I mean, it sounds lovely. I feel more simple just as you're talking. I don't know about anybody else, but you know, that sort of idea, it's very, you're very drawn to a simple habit, a simple practice. So that's lovely. I was with Stuart and Bernie, and we were all kind of debating as well as me facilitating. We also had kind of 5 things, but 3 that the guys thought that they would actually be able to act on as a result of the conversation. So Stuart was talking about being able to open up lines of communication at every level in the organisation, and just really that's it. That could be the one thing it could do as a result of this. And Bernie's, over and above everything else, was to actually open up a conversation at the leadership level in particular, but across the organisation, of what is the culture we want to have, what will serve us. And this is in a context of high growth. So what was, you know, a year ago or 6 months ago isn't necessarily what we're going to need, you know, as we're growing so dramatically. I mean, really, you know, 10% employee growth with quite a lot of churn of people. So the culture being a kind of, you know, an anchor point within all that. So, you know, what actually opening up the discussion about it. And then the other thing that we thought might be a bit of a sort of killer app in a way is, and it could be one of those simple habits, Orla, is introducing a conversation everywhere about what's a good boundary, about boundaries, about actually being able to invoke that in any kind of moment. One of our speakers yesterday talked about moments that matter, change, Instead of doing the big change program, is actually doing it moment by moment and noticing moments that matter. So they were the three sort of things that we thought would actually you guys would take away and possibly enact on. There were two other things: leadership, getting this stuff and being emotionally intelligent and sort of equipped with that, and confident enough to see how they could deliver the results as well as the people bit. And in particular from Stuart, but I think from us all, about pacing and the diversity of people's interest in this stuff versus task versus loyalty into the whole values or not or whatever, and pacing it according to the whole team rather than there's a whole bunch of people who want to zoom off here, but actually kind of going in a more holistic kind of paced way. Gosh, we've got quite a lot of discussion out 20 minutes, haven't we? I am wondering, we're all together, and I don't see some of you on the screen, but I'm wondering kind of what's your top thinking? What's your best thinking as a result of this? There's a lovely phrase from Anne that she often uses. What's our collective best thinking? What's your best thinking when you're going to walk away from this in 10 minutes time?
Maybe one of the things that we talked about that really matters to me anyway is the idea of thinking about leadership as something that is really distributed in an organization, and finding the leadership qualities in everybody. There's always something that somebody can lead on, and I think that means you always kind of play to people's strengths and their passion, their desires, but so encouraging this kind of distributed leadership, I think. And we talked about that in our, and I thought that was maybe a good thought.
I'd like to build on the back of that. Something that Abby pointed out to us was about not making assumptions. So the apprentice can bring something just as much as the CEO or the chairman or whoever it is, and that was part really of that sort of discussion, I think. Yeah.
Anyone else? Elaine?
My key thinking really is about what we're discussing, a very small world. So showing to feel and experience. So one of the questions was, who needs to understand? In order to understand it, you need to experience it. You can't get wet using the word water. You've got to get in it to feel the quality and quantity of water. So rather than tell to sell, which a lot of data sets do, that feeling of those small moments somebody's described, I think they would probably be more powerful than a hard sales pitch, which sets you up behaviourally to say no thanks. I'm grand, thanks very much, because we're very British, don't you know? So we don't need any help. We're all very perfectly okay. And so those many moments might be demonstratively easier for people to connect with, particularly when we're time poor or we're reporting as time poor. So that, for me, that's a key takeaway. And I love the phrase listening at scale. Totally taking that and using it.
Anyone else?
Yes, Jenny, you were mentioning when we were chatting about boundaries, and it just got me thinking when others were talking there about the importance of welcoming people into the organisation. We often talk about it as induction and induction packs and going through all these things, but I've noticed some that the biggest difference is when I can have a catch up with somebody joining and I'm line managing them, but when they've been speaking to colleagues and they kind of hear things about the flexibility of working or the way they, on a project they've been involved with, and just how much more that makes a difference to them, and how then that helps shape them into the organisation than anything I do in a kind of induction style. So it was just getting me thinking that actually we need to make sure we're doing that really well, because often we overlook that a little bit, but it speeds up because the work takes over. So yeah, I'd mentioned communication before, but setting that up at the beginning and giving them more informal ways of doing that, which is always harder because lots of us work from home. So I think that'll be something else I'll try and think about and do.
Lovely. And Elizabeth, sorry, I hadn't noticed before.
I think the thought that I'm taking from this, and it's thank you to Orla actually from the way she started our round table, because she asked us to take a minute to arrive and to be and to just to focus. But it really made me think about, how do we just be? What about being resilient and offering that experience to other people, which is what Orla did. You know, we're here to talk about it, and I have to admit, I was sort of trying to recover from a sort of, wow, that was like lots of stuff for me to try to process. But that moment, that 60 seconds where I could just be, was actually a gift of just saying that was my moment to access my resilience. So I think there's something in this about how, you know, whether or not it's practitioners take that, but actually taking that as a concept, that it's actually how to start being. And so therefore, you know, people need to experience what actually that feels like, rather than being told it in data and lots of lovely explanations, but you just need to feel it. So thank you all for that.
Lovely, lovely. And I know that there's a few others who maybe have difficulty with audio. If you do and you can't actually come in, do tell us in the chat room. You know, there's some others who haven't quite made it to be able to speak. So I think Kate, Bernie, you maybe not actually taking anything, and then I'll sort of close with Anne and Orla now and just see our own reflections. So you don't have to say anything, Kate.
Yes, Elaine.
Bernie, you came on.
No, it's just the bit, I think Orla said it about weaving it into everyday lives, I think is my key takeaway. So no, that's really it for me.
Lovely, that's great. Kate, I wasn't sure whether you were sort of wanting to share or not. No worries if you don't. Anne, Orla, any reflections from you in terms of the kind of discussions you have?
It's not really around part of the discussion we had, but I think the, you know, simplicity and time are two key themes that keep on coming up with, you know, lots and lots of clients. The other key theme, and I think Stuart mentioned, is boundaries. And actually, how do we collude with others to invite them to disrespect our own boundaries? And that can be a really, really uncomfortable thought of, I've spent the last however many years, 20 years, teaching other people to disrespect my boundaries. And that's, if I was to take one theme that keeps on coming up in conversations with clients, it's at the moment, it's boundaries. And it's a really uncomfortable thing to process of what we actually teach other people to do. And then it causes all sorts of issues within us and within the organization.
So no, there's a killer question. Anne, your own reflection?
I think there's a couple of things. One is about being a human. So the two, being a human rather than doing, is one thing. But just linked to that idea of boundaries, it's also about being willing to ask questions that nobody else is asking, so that you can really see something that's being hidden from view, and being willing sometimes to go beyond what feels comfortable in order to see something from a different perspective, you know, offering that contrary view, or turning something on its head, because there's something about, we've normalized a lot of things, and actually sometimes I think we need to be willing to say, you know, okay, we're saying that's normal, but come on, let's turn that around. So not staying within a safe boundary, sometimes being willing to open things and push those boundaries and say the uncomfortable.
Mary Claude now.
Well, I put my hand down now, but I was, because I wasn't sure that I had a clearly articulated thought, but I was suddenly struck by how so many things came together, because time is important because in a sense it promotes reflexivity, right? You're able to access yourself, to think a little bit more deeply, to maybe admit to some vulnerability, to think hard about how you feel, and so being more honest, and maybe through the process becoming more resilient. But if you do that on your own and your interlocutor is not prepared to play by the same rules, then that doesn't work. So you really do need to create a healthy organization where there is therefore psychological safety. Unless you've created that safety around, all of these things mean nothing. Because all it is you're vulnerable and you get some so, not useful.
Yeah, and I know we've come to 2:30 and we have to stop, and I feel like, oh, we just started scratching the surface. I mean, first of all, a big thanks, and my own reflections are actually, I was holding the word psychological safety, and actually for an organisation, I'm working next week with an organisation there's been so much disruption, etc., and there is a sense of lack of safety, and they use the word fragile. And actually how much is available to them already without the external person. And I think my job is almost to not be there, to offer them the space just to be together. and I wonder, that human connection, that alignment around something that matters to them, actually they're already very resourceful. So my own reflections are around psychological safety maybe being there, but being shoved under the table. And actually just the conditions for it. So we would love to go into more conversations with you. It's just such a pleasure to be to talk with you. I'm really glad that you're all taking away something that's actually kind of, time oriented and simple enough that you can actually act on, and just watch the space. If you want more, if you want to get into working on resilience more in your organizations, it would be our greatest pleasure to work with you. So we will call it to a close. So may your resilience be with you.